Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this Basil Ingram webinar on reflective practice in social work. My name is Gavin Morgan, and I'm a professional officer and social worker for the association. With me, I have Jane Hurd from the consultant clinical social worker from the Centre for Social Work Practice, and also I have with me Tom Stibbs, who is principal social worker from Brighton and Hove Council. We're going to be talking about how social workers can and should be supported by organisations to do relationship-based practice. It's part of our wider 80/20 campaign. You can find more details on the website where we're campaigning for more relationship-based social work in social work, in children and family social work, and trying to reduce that time that we spend doing the administrative tasks, time in front of the computer and other process-driven activities. Throughout this webinar, we're going to be asking that you send in any questions or comments. There could be general comments about your current experience, whether you're a frontline practitioner, whether you're a manager or somebody or another social worker working in the field. You could be a student on placement. And we just want to hear what you have to say. So please, you've got your panel on the software, so you can type anything through, and we'll receive that. And we'd also like to hear any questions that you have as well. So if you've got any questions for Jane or Tom, this is the time to put it. We'll save it to the end, and then we'll go through the questions at that point. But that's enough from me. I believe now you can see the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm just looking to my assistant here who says yes, you do. And I think what we'll do is start with Jane. Jane, if it's okay, please give a brief introduction, and whenever you're ready, just tell me when I need to flick through to the next PowerPoint slide.
Yeah, I can't see the slides, but yeah, if you could put the next one on, that would be helpful.
Just one moment. So,
oh, and the next one.
Okay, excellent.
So, thank you, Gavin, for introducing me. I'm Dr. Jane Hurd. I'm going to talk about, we call them RPGs, but reflective practice groups, which is a particular way of organising reflective practice in social work and other settings. It's not the only way to do things, but it's a particular way that we were interested in and we think is helpful. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm talking on behalf of the Centre for Social Work Practice, which is a small charity which has been going for about 6 years. And whose aim is to promote relationship-based social work nationally through events. And particularly, one of the projects it's taken on is around reflective practice groups. Can you go to the next slide? And just to say, because all that is on the slides as well, that I was initially the first director at the centre. And as part of that, we set up with Tom this reflective practice group project that we'll both be talking about. And more latterly, I've been working with the centre on a consultancy basis in thinking with them about how to develop the project further. Okay, next slide, please. So, reflective practice groups are a particular model, as I said earlier, of reflection. It's based on, it's sometimes called work discussion, and is used a lot in some trainings, more sort of clinical social work, psychotherapy, psychology, those sorts of, and quite a lot in social work in some areas. What we had as an organisation is, if you talk to people about whether you call them RPGs or work discussion, people say, oh, they're really good, I find them really useful. And so we thought, okay, but where's the evidence base for that? Because we know we are now in an evidence-based environment. You are as social workers, we are as sort of academics and organisations. And so we did a literature review, a scoping exercise. And if you go to cfswp.org, and we can probably put the link on the Basel website, I'm sure, you'll find a scoping exercise they did probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, looking at the existing evidence base and what people were doing nationally. And I suppose one of the major things we found out was, again, that everybody thinks they're jolly good and very helpful, but there was very little in terms of an evidence base. So we decided to look for a partner to actually do some evaluation with. Next slide. And what happened is, at that point, Tom and his colleague, I think Jane Sloan in training, who's also very central, turned up saying, we're doing a relationship-based reorganisation, could you be helpful? How could we work together? Which was really nice to be asked. And the obvious thing for us to offer was reflective practice groups, both, as I said earlier, because we were looking for a way of evaluating in a much more sort of coherent and systematic way. But also, what we believe as an organisation, and I think hopefully the evidence bears this out, if you're going to work relationally, if you're going to be really in touch with the emotional impact of the work that we do, then we need spaces for reflection and not just hypothesising, which is grand, not just for thinking, but also for feeling, and also to try and look at the complexity of dynamics and underlying issues and things that may not initially be apparent, but you may need to spend some time with colleagues to sort of unearth or discover. And if you're going to work relationally, therefore, we thought that reflective practice groups might be really useful. So we set up a project in 2014-15. It's been ongoing ever since, which I think says something about how useful it would be, because we sort of commissioned on a yearly basis, so that's been a rolling programme, and we've now got 2 very positive and interesting evaluations, and Tom will talk more about those. Next slide. So I'm going to say a bit about what's an RPG, what's a reflective practice group, because I presume we know that social workers from the surveys Basel have done often struggle to find reflective spaces, but some people do. And as we say, this is a particular way of doing it, so I'll just explain. So they run for an hour and 15 minutes. It says here on a monthly basis, and that's how we did Brighton. In some organisations, they actually run more often. But monthly is fine. Monthly works, I think, organisationally. Groups of 10 to 12 members. Just because any more than that, you just don't have enough space to think and talk. And you have a facilitator. So some reflective spaces are not facilitated. These spaces are. And I'll talk a bit more as we go on about what the facilitation looked like. And Brighton decided who was in which groups, and people don't move about groups, but they're not closed groups in that if somebody leaves and somebody joins the organisation, they'll be placed in and allocated a group. So that's how that works. Next, please. There's a particular way of doing these in that one person presents, and that's usually agreed either the time before. Sometimes groups agree a schedule of, say, 3 or 4 groups ahead who's going to present when. And the presenter will speak for about, say, 15 minutes. This isn't to the clock, so it all depends. If they need 20 minutes, that's fine. If it only takes 10, also fine. So, and they'll come with something in particular they want to talk about. For practitioners, for social workers, that's often a case, a particular family or young person that they're working with. But as you will go on to hear, we operate this project throughout the the whole of the hierarchy in Brighton. So for managers and senior managers, it might be more a dynamic and organisational issue. So there is, you know, so you can bring whatever you want, as long as it's something you can, you know, can talk about and explore fairly in depth. Now, one of the sort of rules is that the group listens but doesn't ask questions, which allows people just to speak, not be interrupted, and to be heard. And it's also, you know, really good practice for us all to sit and listen. You know, really listen to somebody for 10 or 15 minutes. Next, please. And after the presenter, the person who's presented has finished, they're still part of the group, they still sit there with everybody, but they just sit and listen. So they listen to what the group has made of what they say. So the group isn't allowed to ask some questions, which again might sound very odd, but, you know, so it's one of the things facilitators deal with. So if somebody really wants to know something, as a facilitator, I would be interested about, well, what difference would it make if you know that? Why do you think why is it so important? And if you think it's so important, how comes do you think that person didn't talk about it? Because all those things would help you begin to understand things better. Whereas if the person just asked the question and told you 1989 or whatever, or 4 children, you know, that what more does that say to you? Whereas actually exploring what it is you're interested in, what the person has said, really opens up the conversation. So the group will have a conversation, and the facilitator helps by sort of keeping them on task, allowing perhaps quieter people a bit more space, and trying to begin to sort of draw out underlying issues and dynamics and patterns, looking for sort of what's going on beyond what's being said, if that makes sense. Next, please. And one of the things is that it's not about fixing things, offering advice or making things better. So one of the reasons, again, we do it like this is it stops people going into, have you tried this, or have you talked to so-and-so, or when I had this, I did that. Because what I think about when people present in these spaces is that people would have had those sorts of conversations. You know, you're sensible people, you're highly skilled. You know, you would have spoken to your team manager, you would have spoken to your colleagues, you would have had a think about it, you would have done some reading, perhaps, you know. And if you're bringing it to this sort of space, it's because those sort of sensible things haven't moved things on, or you're still not sure about it, or you're feeling very uncomfortable. So we're not looking for what to do. We're looking about what's going on, how are you feeling, what do you think that might say, what's going on in the group. The sorts of dynamics that go on in groups can play out what might be going on in a family or a system, and you can begin to think about that. We have the next slide, please. And one of the things, this is a particular way I tend to talk to groups, and this is because I'm particularly interested in neurodevelopment. So I'm saying to people, you know, to the group, when they've listened to the speaker, what came up to you in terms of bodily sensations? Because sometimes you listen to things and you can feel yourself breathless or anxious or, you know, tightening or, you know, so what's going on bodily? What might that say? How are you feeling? You know, did you come in the room bouncing and the person's told the story and you're feeling really depressed? And there may not be something obviously depressing about that story, but you're feeling sort of hopeless, and then what's that about? Images and metaphors. I'm particularly interested in this. So song lyrics, pictures. I once spent a group talking about, I have a conservatory and bees fly in and out, and I end up chasing them, and they bounce off the glass bees. And I spend quite a lot of my time in the summer chasing around with one of those children's fishing nets and rescuing them and flinging them out of the conservatory. And I don't need to say much about that to say why that's a very interesting metaphor for social work sometimes, that you're running about after people who you think you're trying to be helpful and they're not wanting you to help them, and then when you rescue them, which isn't our task anyway, they just go off and, so that's what I mean. That's an example of a metaphor that came to my mind, but other metaphors come to other people's minds, which might help you understand more about what's going on. Then thoughts, what are you thinking about this? What's coming up? And then lastly, the absolute last thing, and comes usually towards the end of the group, or may not come at all, is action. Well, is there something from this very interesting conversation that leads you to think you might do something, you might want to go away and do something, have a conversation, read a particular article, whatever, So, but it's sort of that inner hierarchy of what you're attending to, which is probably the opposite of usually what we do, interestingly. Next, please. So this model is theoretically grounded. It's based on systemic ideas around organisational dynamics, parallel processes, also psychotherapeutic ideas about unconscious processes. And we're as much interested in sort of emotional impact and feelings as we are about sort of outcomes in some sort of way, which people might be interested to think about, because often in social work we are very sort of outcome focused. Next, please. What happened with Brighton is we accidentally created a model, which only recently, in the last year or so, did I sort of contextualise and conceptualise and write down, and then sent to Tom and said, do you think this is what we're doing? And I think we are. So it's something called the whole system RPG model. And there's three things about it which we feel are essential. And and I spoke to lots of local authorities when we were looking to replicate Brighton, and it became clear to me when I was talking to them that there were certain things I was sort of saying were deal breakers, were actually part of this way of doing things. So one of the ways of one of the things that's important with the whole system RPG model is it is the whole system, that it is owned from the AD, the assistant director, all the way through the organisation, so senior managers, social workers, and some selected unqualified or associate sort of staff, depending on what the organisation decide. So everybody in an organisation is put in a monthly group. And it's the other thing that happens is that the groups are what called horizontally mixed. So you're not going to find yourself terrifyingly in a group with the PSW or your assistant director. So all the social workers are in groups, but you won't be with your team. You'll be from people from lots of different teams in your organisation, all mixed up. And that was one of the things that Brighton thought would be helpful, but actually has had lots of added benefits in terms of people getting to know each other across the across the organisation, being able to have a lot more of a mix of thinking when talking about something, and also more of a sense of sort of cohesion and a way of sort of maybe some attending to some of the stories they get in organisations about some people working harder than others or having more cases or whatever. If you're actually sitting with people from a wide range of teams, you can really get a sense about what's going on across the whole organisation. Next, please. And so it's in the whole system. People are mixed up across the organisation, so that's the second important thing. And the third thing is that how we do facilitation. So the centre provides what's called external facilitators. There's two in Brighton. There might be, depending on how big a project it is, it might be 1 or 2 people or more. And these external facilitators are very experienced, either social workers with a therapeutic background or therapists with a social work background. So they've got a foot in each camp, and they facilitate the senior manager groups, because one of the things we try to avoid is people facilitating a group with people who they are supervising. So this is one of the ways we address this. So we provide an external facilitator for senior managers and managers, and then there's also an internal facilitators group who we train up basically, or work alongside. So they have their own RPG group with the external facilitator, but they also have a training slot in the first year, and they provide all the groups for practitioners. So all the social work groups are run in-house by in Brighton's consultant social workers. In other settings it might be senior practice leads. So that's a real way of embedding the expertise in the organisation, so that actually the facilitation of the groups for social workers are done within the organisation. I think that's probably all I want to say at the moment, in terms of just the basics of the group. So I'll hand over to Tom to talk more about the Brighton model and actually the outcomes and evaluation.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
Jane, thank you very much for that. I'm just sorry, Tom, to interrupt you there. I'm just going to say, but before we progress, please, everybody, do send in questions and comments, whether it's in relation to what we're talking about today or the wider issue of the campaign, the 80/20 campaign. We want to hear about any experiences people might be having in relation to challenges of being overwhelmed with the process-driven activities, and we also want to hear some good examples of where you feel you are able to do that relationship-based practice, and just any other thing really relating to the campaign. Please do send in the questions. Tom, yeah, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. So I'm Tom Stibbs. I'm the Principal Social Worker for Children and Families for Brighton and Hove City Council. And I was going to talk to you a bit about how we might be able to support social workers and organisations to create space for reflection and to build relationships. And I was going to do that by talking about how the reflective practice groups that James talked about fit in with our model of practice and our kind of vision of what good social work looks like. So first of all, I was going to say a little bit about our model of practice. So if we move to the next slide, please. We introduced a model of practice in October 2015, and our model is based on relationship-based practice. And we introduced a model because we realised about 4 or 5 years ago that we weren't performing in the way that we wanted to be. We knew that because of our own data and our own quality assurance processes, but we also knew it because families were telling us that they were fed up of having to change social workers all the time. And we also knew it because our own social workers were telling us that they didn't feel supported, they didn't feel like they had time to build relationships and to affect change with families. They felt that they were weighed down by the burdens of administration and having to write reports. So what we did was we worked with our practitioners and with families and young people and developed a vision of what excellent social work looked like, and that included a theory of change and sort of key principles that would underpin our model. And our theory of change is quite simple. It's just that if social workers feel supported and contained, they can build relationships with families and use these relationships to facilitate change. Or one of the young people who was part of the advisory group that worked with us, he put it even more succinctly. He said that a happy social worker makes better decisions, which I think is a really nice phrase. And then the key principles underpinning our model are, first of all, continuity of relationships between social workers and families. So that means that a family can have the same social worker all the way through our processes. They don't have to change social workers or social work teams based on where they are in our processes. Consistency of relationships between social work teams and families, so that families get to know not just their allocated social worker, but other workers in the team, the pod manager, the business support officer, so they always feel like there's somebody there that they can contact who knows them. Collaboration between practitioners, so social workers work together to use their skills to support families. Social workers being purposeful partners in change with families, and this is really important. It's about social workers maybe seeing their role with families as being different, not necessarily being about monitoring or collecting evidence, but being about actually helping families to affect the changes they want to make. And then the organisation supporting a learning culture, and finally a transformation of our organisational culture from a blame culture to a relationship-based one that inspires trust and confidence. And if we can move to the next slide, please, Gavin. So that's the kind of model of practice and what we are trying to achieve. And then when we were thinking about implementing the model of practice, we realised that it wasn't just as simple as sending all of our social workers on a training course in relationship-based practice and saying to them, okay, get on with it. That actually what we needed to do was to think about a whole system change. And we recognised that obviously we were looking at a complex situation, and that complex situations need complex solutions. So a part of that solution was thinking about structural changes to our teams. So we did a service redesign, and we introduced small social work teams called pods that are made up of 7 full-time equivalent social workers, a pod manager and a business support officer. And in the pod structure, the kind of social work relationship is seen as being at the heart of a network of relationships. So you've got the social worker working with the family, and that being the key relationship to affect change. But then you have the other social worker supporting that social worker, you have other specialist practitioners and managers supporting that social worker. So that relationship is informed by other relationships and other skills and expertise can feed into the relationship the social worker has with the family. And that's quite informed by the AMBIT model, which is one of the things that we support our social workers to use and think about. As well as the structural change, we had to try and base our new model on building a new culture, and we aspired to create relationship-based management and leadership. We're trying to create a culture of trust and openness, and we're trying to develop a culture that prioritises relationships, containment and direct work. And that culture itself has to be supported by new processes as well, and these processes include new quality assurance processes. So we've got new ways of completing audits that are led by practitioners. So practitioners are auditing their own work and kind of evaluating their own performance and thinking about how they're supporting families, rather than that feeling like a top-down process where managers are auditing their work. We also introduced our one-story model of recording and assessment, which is about trying to reduce duplication and repetition, but is also about trying to make sure that recording is written for families and tells one story that makes sense to families and to practitioners. And then finally, obviously, another key process that we've introduced is our new supervision model, which includes one-to-one supervision, group supervision, but very importantly includes the reflective practice groups that Jean was talking about. So if we move on to the next slide, there's kind of a representation there of our supervision model. And I did say it was a complex solution to a complex problem. So I know that handout might not be very clear to people. I guess the key bits is that all of our social work teams have weekly group supervision. And those group supervisions are a space for reflective discussion about families, but very importantly about making decisions for those families in terms of how the social work team are going to support them. All of our social workers also have one-to-one supervisions with their managers, at least every 4 to 6 weeks. And the one-to-one supervisions focus very much on professional development, but also do some sort of the case decision-making for families as well. And then the third part of our supervision model is the reflective practice groups. And as Gillian's explained, all of our practitioners at every level of the organisation are part of these monthly groups. And the purpose of the reflective practice groups within our model is about providing emotional containment for practitioners. They're about supporting development of good practice, and they're about building relationships across the whole system. So if we can move on to the next slide, Gavin. The next slide says a bit about why we think supervision is important within our model of practice. And I think it's really important there to go back to our theory of change in that statement, that if social workers feel supported and contained, we think they can build relationships with families and use those relationships to affect change. So for us, the key functions of supervision are firstly to provide a container for professional anxiety. And by professional anxiety there, we're thinking about the emotional impact for practitioners of working with families in distressing situations. Secondly, supervision also provides a container for organisational anxiety. And by organisational anxiety, there we're referring to some of the stress and anxiety that might be caused for practitioners by working in the system that is focused on timescales and deadlines, maybe working within a system that workers experience as quite punitive or blaming, people's anxiety around maybe being on the front page of the newspapers if something goes wrong for one of their families. And then thirdly, we see supervision as a means to help social workers to think about families in a purposeful way. And very importantly, we don't think that you can do the third thing, help social workers think about families and how they might support them, unless you've done the first two first. So you need to provide that containment for social workers before you can help them think about the families that they're supporting. When we were developing our model of practice and our supervision model, we did quite a lot of discussion with Donald Forrester. One of the key things I think that we've learned from Donald was around thinking about how, if we become a relationship-based organisation and help social workers to be the best they can be, that might mean that they can help families to be the best that they can be too. So it's something really important for us about using supervision as a way of investing in our practitioners. And as I said earlier, I think it's really important to recognise that complex problems require complex solutions, and what that means for supervision is that actually one form of supervision isn't necessarily going to meet all of the needs of social work practitioners, and so that's why we have one-to-one supervision, group supervision and reflective practice groups, different ways of helping social workers to think about what's happening for the families that they support and impact on them. So if we can move on to the next slide, I just wanted to say a little bit about whether our supervision model was working and then go on to talk about what that means for reflective practice groups. So if supervision is about providing purposeful containment, we need to think about, is there any evidence that that's happening? So first of all, in terms of evidence around social workers seeming to be contained, there seems to be some positive feedback around this and the potential for our supervision model to be helping social workers. First of all, we had an Ofsted inspection last year, and one of the conclusions of their report was that social workers' morale is high and they enjoy working in Brighton and Hove. Also, we complete our version of the social work health check every year, and we call it Your Voice Social Work Survey. And this year, 89% of social workers who responded said they felt safe and supported, and 97% agreed that they felt trusted to make decisions in their role to affect a positive change. And obviously those responses do indicate that hopefully social workers are starting to feel more supported by us as an organisation. Interestingly, the 89% of social workers who said they felt safe and supported has increased from 64% the first time we asked that question in 2016. If we can go on to the next slide, Gavin, I then just wanted to say something about whether there's evidence about purposeful work happening with families, because obviously that's the point of containing social workers and helping social workers is so they can make a difference for families. So we need to think about whether social workers feeling more contained is making a difference for families. And we recognise that it's really difficult to measure causal links between changes to social work systems or processes and outcomes for families. But if we look at the proxy indicators that people often use to consider this, you can see that in terms of the number of children who are subject to a child protection plan or the number of children who are in our care, they're both significantly reduced since we introduced the model of practice. And that's by, I think it's 21%, 17% and 21% respectively. And we've also seen a significant reduction in the number of applications we're making for care proceedings to the courts. For example, that's gone down from 26 a quarter in 2016-17 to 15 per quarter last year. And all of those figures are within a context of increasing rates nationally. But it's very important, I should add a caveat there, that we did start off with very high numbers in each of those areas, so we did start at a high place and are coming down. But hopefully they do show an indication that purposeful work is happening with families and that less children are experiencing significant harm. So if we can move to the next slide, Gavin. I just wanted to say a little bit about whether this has anything to do with our supervision model and whether it's got anything to do with reflective practice groups. So in terms of our supervision model, in regards to Your Voice Social Work Survey, people are asked about how their experiences of the different parts of our supervision model are happening. And you can see there that this year, 88% of people said that they had a positive experience of one-to-one supervision, and 81% of of people gave positive responses around group supervision, and 93% of people who responded gave positive feedback around reflective practice groups. So there's an indication that the different parts of the supervision model are seen positively by practitioners. And if we can move to the next slide, Gavin. I then wanted to focus a bit on some of the deeper evaluation of the impact of the reflective practice groups. And as Jane said, the Centre for Social Work Best Practice have commissioned 2 independent evaluations of our groups, one in 2017 and one earlier this year. And those evaluations suggest that reflective practice groups provide emotional support and reassurance. So what they talk about is participants saying that they feel reassured and supported by attending reflective practice groups. They state that the process gives them a sense of shared experience with their peers. The reflective practice groups also provide a better sense of the organisation as a whole. So the evaluation found that the groups were helping to break down siloed views, they were enhancing pride in people's work and providing more understanding of the challenges faced across the teams. And then thirdly as well, the evaluation identifies that there's an enhanced capacity for reflection and thoughtful practice. So actually participants, and I think this is really important and quite significant, because participants were taking more thoughtful action with families as a result of having time to reflect on their cases. So there's a quote there from one of our practitioners saying, and then me, having had that space to reflect and think and to, look at new strategies, I then went back to the family and said, we need to do something about this because this is not okay. It hasn't been working and it makes you very anxious. And he apologised and I said, okay, we're talking on completely different terms now, and the child remained at home. So there's starting to be some sort of potential link that the evaluation's highlighting between people, between practitioners reflecting in the groups and then taking that reflection and that impacting on their practice with families and then making a difference for families as well. If we can go to the next slide, Gavin. The evaluation has also highlighted some negative experiences around the group. And in 2017, these kind of focused on 3 key areas. So first of all, around poor attendance of the groups. Secondly, a lack of disposition to reflect in some group members. And then thirdly, varying quality of facilitation. And they were identified in 2017. In the evaluation earlier this year, there was a positive message in that the varying quality of facilitation and the lack of disposition to reflect for some group members seems to have been addressed. So they were recognised there was a recognition that had changed over time. So I think that's a good example of how when you're trying to embed a model like the reflective practice groups or our model of practice as a whole, it's really important to recognise that a lot of the impacts will be long-term impacts, and so it's really important to be committed to these sort of changes on a long-term basis. However, it is also really important to highlight that poor attendance is an ongoing challenge that we experience. And I know Jane, when she was explaining the groups, talked about groups having 10 to 12 participants. But I think often the reality is actually it might be much more around 6, 7, 8 kind of people who attend the groups. And so, and that's fine. Groups can work really well. And I've been, from my personal experience, you can have a really good group, even with 4 or 5 participants. But actually, we need to acknowledge there's a real challenge for us around attendance of the groups. And we started off by saying very clearly that the groups were mandatory and people had to attend, but we've kind of moved towards a position now where we say to people that the groups are a really key part of our offer and we think they're really important. But we, I guess, are more acknowledging that we think they're a key part of the model and we'd like people to attend, but we're not kind of monitoring their attendance and taking a punitive approach to that. In the second evaluation this year, there was a specific focus on people who weren't attending and kind of getting feedback from them. And one of the findings was quite positive around that actually some people were saying they weren't attending the reflective practice groups because they felt that they were being given opportunities to reflect in other spaces within our model of practice. And that kind of links to one of the key findings generally from this year's evaluation, which is around the enhanced capacity for reflective practice at an organisational level, which is part of our whole system change, which our model of practice represents. And there's a quote there from one of our practitioners from one of the focus groups for the evaluation, who says, I do feel like the organisation's changed really. When you see pockets of thinking that would never have been there, I suppose there was a question for me again early on about how much are people taking this thinking back into the pods and the teams. I suppose I feel a bit more confident that they are now really, and I think there's a real openness to ideas. And if we can move on to the next slide, Gavin. The evaluation really kind of tries to pull out how reflective practice groups appear to work. And the key points around this are that they provide a framework in which deep reflection and challenge can happen. They're part of, and they also kind of embody our relationship-based approach and our ongoing commitment to this. They hold and value staff so that staff want to come and work for us and helps with retainment. They contribute to an improvement in relationships and reflective capacity across the organisation and starting to show the potential for this to impact on work with service users. And they enhance whole system awareness so that the learning of reflective practice groups actually get carried forward and makes a difference for families. And I'm nearly there. If we can just go on to the next slide, Gavin. I just wanted to finish with two really important examples, I think, around reflective practice. The first is an example of the difference that they make around holding and valuing staff. And this is a quote from a manager in one of the focus groups for the evaluation. It rekindles that investment in staff, investment in a way of working that shows it's not a flash in the pan. Oh, this is our idea this year. Next year we're going to be about doing that, and the year after that will be something else. Actually, I think it continues to reinforce this is how we want to see our workforce working with families in an organisation. So I think in terms of the outcomes or what it achieves, and I think how you measure it could be in a range of ways. You could say, well, actually, look at our stability of workforce over the last couple of years. As an organisation, we haven't had any agency social workers for at least a year and a half. So the manager's recognising there the difference that the RPGs might make towards our stable workforce and people wanting to carry on working for us. And if we can move on to the very last slide, one of the challenges we had when we introduced our model of practice and when we introduced the reflective practice groups was actually, I don't have time for all this supervision and reflection. If I'm doing all the supervision and reflecting on practice, I won't have time to actually do any of the practice. And actually, if we look at the Your Voice social work survey, this actually shows that social workers are spending more time on direct work and less on recording. So there's a table there which shows the results for this year compared to last year when people asked a question about how they spend their time. And you can see that there's a significant increase in terms of the amount of time that people are spending on direct work with children and with adults in families. And they both increased from 13% to 25% and 23% respectively. And there's also a significant decrease in the amount of time that people are spending on reports and admin. It's gone down from 39% to 29%. So I think hopefully that might be an example of the kind of potential for having a good supervision model and opportunity for reflection, and those things actually helping people to spend more time on prioritising and completing direct work rather than undermining direct work. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Gavin. So I think we can move on to the questions.
Thank you both, Tom and Jane. Yeah, we've got a few questions that have come through. The first question has just been sent through to me, so I'll just, this is more of a general question, so let's see how this goes. The question is has the 80/20 campaign engaged with the issue of statutory and locally required reporting? I've been working with a number of local authorities to try to streamline and improve their processes to concentrate more on narrative and conversation. One problem we keep coming up against is some of the very specific and seemingly bizarre information that needs to be captured for reports which sometimes have little obvious impact on direct practice. What I would say, I'm going to come to you both, Tom and Jane, in a moment, but the 80/20 what I would say is the 80/20 campaign is an ongoing process, and we're sort of doing a number of things and a number of initiatives, including listening to what our members tell us. What we've picked up through roundtable events so far is that there are some myths on what information should be captured, some which perhaps has just become a matter of course, but actually isn't always necessary and relevant for particular cases. I won't advise anybody on what they should and shouldn't record in this particular webinar, because I don't think that would be helpful. But what I would say is that we are planning a podcast in the coming months with Ofsted, and that will be a great opportunity to hear about what relevant information should be captured, because what we don't want to have is a situation where people are capturing all information and it's not always relevant. And we are looking as well to have some guidelines and pointers on best practice in relation to recording and other matters. But Tom, Jane, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
I guess I would just want to add that I certainly recognise that tension and that frustration, and obviously that's been one of the key drivers for us around developing our one-story model of recording assessment, trying to make our forms as simple as possible to allow social workers just to write their assessments and to think about all of their recording being about having the child and the family as the anticipated audience. It is a real, and I guess some of the challenges around statutory reporting, what we need to report to the DFE is difficult sometimes, and we're certainly working on that at the moment in terms of trying to streamline our processes for our new recording system, which we're moving to. I was quite heartened to be part of the last 80-20 roundtable discussion when Ofsted the Ofsted representative was very clearly saying that Ofsted's principles around recording are very much in tune with that in terms of actually supporting recording not being as concise as possible and very much being written for the child and family. So hopefully there's something there which can help maybe address some of those challenges going forward.
Yeah, and just to back up that, I think we agreed out of that there's going to be a subgroup, particularly looking at recording with people from Ofsted, what works, BASVA, and also looking to local authorities who are beginning to get a sense of a relationship way of recording, including Brighton. And I'm just thinking, we've invited Ofsted and we've invited What Works. We could probably, and this is a conversation for us to have, but be talking to the DFE, Department of Education, thinking, well, is there ways that we can start to think with them as well? Because certainly we've had a very positive response to what I said.
Thank you both. We've got another question now from Hazel, who's going to be brought into us. So, hello, Hazel, can you hear us? Hello, Hazel? No? Okay. Unfortunately, we can't get Hazel, so I will go on to the next question. This is, I think, a question directed at Tom, but it might be for both of you. How do senior managers get involved in RPG, reflective practice groups, or group supervision? Only as facilitators or participants as well?
Okay, so in terms of our reflective practice groups, we have groups for social workers across the system, we have groups for managers across the system, and then we have a group for senior leaders. So that group is made up of myself and the heads of service, and we are facilitated by an independent consultant commissioned by the Centre for Social Work Practice. So it's really important as part of that kind of whole model, whole system RPG model, that senior managers, senior leaders are part of reflective practice groups, are participants of groups, and are kind of modelling that to the rest of the system. And I can speak, from being part of that group, it is a group that is really well attended and that actually has a really good impact for people. Obviously, in terms of group supervision, we also have we also try and have a model that people are delivered, so managers deliver group supervision to their pods, but we're also trying to encourage a system where heads of service deliver group supervision to their pod managers. So again, there's a bit of an up and down the system in terms of people experiencing it. But that in itself is a challenge to embed. But certainly in terms of the reflective practice groups, it's been a big positive around it has been the senior leaders being participants in the group. Just in terms of Jane's slide, it did mention that the Director of Children's Services, that our DCS isn't part of Reflection Practice Groups. He's very supportive of our model, but I just wanted to clarify that he's not a participant in the groups. Yeah.
But I just absolutely wanted to back up what Tom was saying, because looking at sort of trying to roll this out to other authorities, I think one of the things we've been very clear on is that this is really important, because we've certainly had anecdotal stories of organisations trying to roll it out, you know, and sort of do it to practitioners and expect them to sort of go to groups or have training or whatever. But if it's not owned, I think one of the reasons it's worked so well in Brighton is it is owned from the top down, and that you know, if social workers or managers go, oh, I haven't got time, you know, it's like a conversation that can be had throughout the organisation, because they know their senior managers are really busy and they're going, and I think that really does make sense.
Thank you, thank you. I can see that work time's coming to an end, so we've got a couple more questions. The next one is, what specific actions are taken in the groups to support staff to feel safe, not defensive, about the discussions?
That's an interesting question. I think the model helps in that it's not about looking for solutions. I think also that people aren't in groups with somebody who's supervising them. It's up to the groups about, and the person who presents, about what they take from that group outside. So if they want to talk about it outside that space, and they want to talk about what they might want to be doing differently, they may. But there isn't a sort of reporting or a recording structure from that group. So in that way, I think it's more of a confidential space and in a safer space. But Tom would have some ideas, I'm sure, too.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is obviously, and obviously the groups do talk about the kind of boundaries and the contracting around the group, and think about confidentiality as a key part of that. And obviously that it's really, the groups, as Jane says, are focused on finding solutions and people going off and doing that. But there is a real challenge for people that even if they're not in the same group as other people from their team, people often know each other's teams and things, so people will often know the kind of situations people might be discussing. And there is a challenge as well for the internal facilitators, because the practitioners groups are facilitated by myself and our lead practitioners, and people often within the groups might see us within our roles, not necessarily as the facilitators of the group. So there's a challenge for us there as well, in terms of making people to feel safe that the role that we're taking up is as facilitator, not as lead practitioner or principal social worker. A key part in terms of helping with it as well, though, is how the group develops and the group's identity, and how people sort of learn to feel safe within their relationships within the group. And often that does take time, and obviously that does change, you know, as people come in and out of groups as well. And the attendance as well is a challenge around that as well, because if you're not having the same people attend each month, that makes it hard for that group identity to form.
Thank you. Got another one now. How do you deal with reducing the admin? Do you have a social work friendly computer system?
I don't know if there's easy to answer that, or probably there's such a thing as a social work friendly computer system. Obviously we have tried, you know, and we very practically have tried to, when we introduced our model practice, we had a users group that came up with the one story model and tried to really reduce the number of forms we use, the number of questions that forms asked. We have tried as part of our culture to really say to people, we don't want you to record as much, we want you to record less, to summarise information, but, you know, obviously to record better in terms of what you're using your time to do. And I guess we have tried to reinforce that with our things like then when we've audited the one story model and people's recording. It's an ongoing challenge though, and actually, you know, it's really hard, I think, for social workers often to move from a position where they feel that they have to write down everything that they've done because they've been given a message that they, you know, they need to do that in terms of defending their practice, then move to a way where we're saying it's okay to actually just summarise information and record less. So it's an ongoing challenge. We are moving to a new recording system, and as part of that we're trying to really work with the provider to try and make sure the system is user-friendly, simplified, and also supports things like mobile working and people being able to directly upload direct work they've done with children and things like that. But I don't think there's a simple answer, sorry.
No.
And I just wanted to add that out of the roundtable discussion, one of the people involved in that was Anna Sexton from UEL, who, interestingly, is an archivist but has been working with service users around recording in social work, and has put a bid in with a provider of systems to actually look at getting funding to create a user-friendly, service user-friendly system. And we're working with her, hopefully, to move that forward. So we are definitely thinking about that, because we know a lot of systems at the moment are just not fit for purpose.
Tom, Jane, this has been a really good session, and we've had some positive feedback from the people who've been watching.
You've gone quiet, Gavin. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So thank you very much for your presentations. These were really helpful. We've had some really positive feedback from the people who tuned in. Unfortunately, we can't answer all the questions, I'm afraid, but we will try and get back to you on some of those questions for those of you who have not been answered.
Very happy.
And yeah, there's some really interesting learning points. Please, everybody, do keep up with the 80/20 campaign. There's through our social media and through our website updates, and also, you know, it's a great time to get involved in your branches and push the 80/20 message. You know, we're looking increasingly at our branches to have that impact locally. It's a great way to raise issues, to meet other members, and to talk about issues relating to the 80/20 campaign. But once again, Tom, Jane, thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.